Hey guys, Ryan here at Signature Edits, and inside of this week's Lightroom tutorial, we are doing another edit along with me session. So I've got this week's free raw files for you down in the description link below. Grab those and together we'll create something awesome. Let's do it. Alright, so here we've got our files. You can grab them at signatureedits.com, hit the free raw files tab, and you'll find these and a bunch of other photos you can practice on. Now, make sure to tag at Signature Edits Co. with whatever you come up with today so that I can see the awesome work that you are creating. Alright, let's go through, let's edit, and let's have some fun. So I'm going to start here just because I feel like editing a portrait to start. And the first thing we're going to do before every single edit, I like to actually say to myself, okay, if I had taken this photo, or let's say I actually did take this photo, I will go through and say, what could be better here for next time? What could I change? How can I grow as a photographer? What do I need to remember and apply? Right? There's an amazing amount of lessons you can learn from every single shoot you edit. However, you have to actually ask yourself that question or you're not going to improve the way that you could. So first things first, let's talk about things that are awesome about this photo. Love the pose. The light is great. We've got a nice background. It's not taking away from the photo. All the colors are kind of working together. Really nice that way. A couple little tiny things. Obviously, we're a little bit crooked. Yeah, whatever. That's fine. We've got some color cast on her arm here. And I'm assuming it's because there's grass beside this table. And that light from the grass is coming up, hitting her skin. So just be aware of color casts when you're setting up your shots. This is still beautiful and awesome, but just something to think about. Now, I love the pose. I love the way it's set up. Really, not much that I would improve in this particular photo. Now, let's move on and actually talk about editing, the fun stuff. So I'm going to just do some basic edits here. Actually, no, I'm going to do something else. Instead of actually going through and editing all of these, I just want to show you what's possible by just doing one thing and doing it really well. And that is just shaping light. Because that's what photography really is about. It's figuring out how to use light and use framing and create art, really tell a story. And light and understanding how it works is probably the fundamental thing you need to understand the most about editing. So the color of the light, the brightness of the light, the texture of the light, all these things impact the image. But today we're just going to work on the brightness of that light. So we're just going to grab my exposure on an adjustment brush and take my blacks down a little bit, my shadows down a little bit, and my exposure down a little bit. So I've got a really basic, we'll call it a contouring brush. I'm going to go in here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to shape the light, and I'm going to show you what's possible without using all these other tools in Lightroom if you just really follow the light. So what I'm going to do is everything I want to kind of take away, de-emphasize, maybe enhance the shadows of, I'm just going to brush a little bit more on. So if you look at her eyelids here, right under the eyebrow area of shadow, I'm going to enhance that just like that. Okay. Now under her nose, again, shadow. Under her lips, shadow. And what that's going to do is it's going to give the effect of making those areas seem deeper by having a darker shadow. We're also going to add contrast to the image by having the darkness darker and the light parts lighter. Okay, other things we could maybe adjust here. Under her chin, we've got a nice shadow here, but we'll add some definition to her chin by just enhancing that. Under the hand. And what's crazy is this is a very, very subtle change, right? You're not noticing a whole lot going on when I do this. But then after we've actually gone through and done this one tiny little improvement at a time, you're going to see a massive difference. So we did under the chin, under the nose, we could do here on the side of the cheekbones, right here underneath the cheekbone, and that's going to have kind of a slimming effect on her face. Of course, we could just make her eyebrows a little bit darker, the area right underneath her lips a little bit darker. Under the fingers. I think you're getting the point here. Now we're going to do the exact same thing. Here's before and here's after. Nothing really too intense right now. Of course, we could go over her tattoos, follow the lines of those tattoos. But I'd encourage you, just try doing this. Instead of trying to do every single tool inside of Lightroom, say, okay, what can I get? How much bang for buck can I get from just using this one tool and really mastering this specific setting? You'd be surprised what's possible. Before, after. So we've just started enhancing things a little bit. Of course, we could do other stuff in here like the table, the background a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to take this exact same brush, only now we're going to do the opposite. I'm going to do a little bit of highlights added, a little bit of whites added. And we're basically just going to do the opposite now. So any area that's bright, we're just going to enhance. So on top of the cheekbones, the eyes, on the middle of the nose, maybe her forehead a little bit. Right on the neck. So you just look for areas of light that are naturally brighter and you enhance those. Really that simple. Now there is a faster way to do this on autopilot if you want. Let's just grab another brush here. You could brush on everything, just like that. Press O to see your brush. Go to Range Mask, Luminance, and set that range to just the brightest areas, and all of a sudden we're just going to be brightening the bright parts. You could do the same thing. We'll duplicate this mask, only this time we'll set our range to the darkest parts. Reset our brush here, and just darken the dark parts, right? So that's kind of an autopilot way of doing that, but I really encourage you, get good at dodging and burning. That's what it's called when you make things lighter or darker selectively, because you can make some amazing changes to your image and really just make things pop in a super beautiful way by really mastering light and figuring out, okay, how do I shape this photo? Not just, okay, what sliders do I need to press, but how can I creatively make this something better? Okay, so here's our photo before, here's our photo after. I would warm it up a little bit. I like it warm. Something like that. And of course, there are other things that you could do, like I would really want to enhance the texture of her hair. So we'll just brush on there. You're going to notice I'm not making a ton of global adjustments. Like I'm not adjusting the main contrast or the main tone curve. All that stuff I'm leaving alone, because if the photo is genuinely just kind of good to begin with, you don't really have to worry about that stuff as much. You can spend your time on the more creative elements, just bringing out those things instead of trying to fix them. Okay, this is absolutely awful. We're just going to go down here to my pre-made brush, save myself some time. I've got one for hair and lashes. You can copy that if you want, or if you want that whole touch-up brush set and you're using Lightroom Classic, these brushes come with any preset pack at signatureedits.com. Okay, this is looking all right, maybe a little bit too contrasty, but hopefully you're understanding the point here. I'm just going to brush on her face. One last thing, we'll reset that by holding Alt. Drag our contrast slider down, and this is my favorite way to just brighten an area of an image. Bring the contrast down, because it's also going to soften things up. Lastly, because this is a portrait, we do need to work on her skin, just softening that, really touching it up nice. So I'm just going to go to Skin Soften. Again, you don't need this exact brush. You can just copy those settings. Another thing I love trying to do, take your texture slider down, and that gives you a nice airbrushed look. Obviously, we can only get away with taking that so far. But what we can get away with, we will do. Okay, here's before that and after. Nice. And now since I made certain areas of the image pretty soft, we are going to want to try and sharpen some things back up. So let's go down here to another brush, hair and lashes. Good. Reset, because I don't like the way that's feeling. We'll just take the texture up. Okay, so before, after. Considering most of our sliders have been left alone, we haven't really done anything else, well, I think we did some interesting work. Now, of course, we could go in here, do all sorts of other things, head to the calibration tab, maybe adjust our balance here for a more creative look. Now, if you're wondering how this whole calibration tab works, I made a video on it where I go pretty in depth, so I'd say probably check that out first. Here's before, here's after. You can get some really cool creative effects using the calibration tab. If you want to add some saturation to the skin without making it look too saturated, quick trick for you, just take the luminance down. Obviously you can't take it too far, but just lowering it a little bit can kind of give you the same effect as raising the saturation without actually having to raise the saturation. Okay, so here's our photo before and after. Moving on here, photo number 2, if we hit our J key, you can actually see that pretty much nothing in this photo is clipped. It must have been taken with a camera with great dynamic range because it looks like it should be clipped, but if we pull our exposure back, you can see most of the sky is still in there. So I'm going to start by grabbing my exposure, taking it way down just to correct for the scene. Then I'm going to adjust my white balance. Always my first kind of thing I adjust, exposure and white balance. Once you get those dialed in, everything is way easier to do. All right, let's talk about things that could have been done better. Obviously, we could have watched for stuff like this garbage on the side of the road, distracting elements in the background. This looks like it was probably taken while the car was moving. I don't really know. If the car wasn't moving, well, it would have been nice to A, have that car door closed all the way, B, use a wider lens so we have more of the car and more leading lines leading up to our subject. That would have just made for a much more interesting composition. And then watching for things that are distracting from the photo. Because this photo, if it had, let's just say, a plain sky and some trees and that was it, would be so much more beautiful than with all of these kind of ugly things going on in the back, especially the power lines coming out of the head. So let's actually start editing now that we've talked about that. I'm going to take my highlights down, my shadows up a little bit, and take my whites up a little. Not so much that I'm actually clipping anything, but just to get things a little bit brighter. And my blacks, they can come up as well a little bit too. So here's before, here's after so far. I'm going to take things a little bit more cool and a little bit towards magenta because things are just still feeling a little too green. Just off. All right, that's getting somewhere. Next, I'm just going to work on cleaning up some of this background. Using our spot removal tool, we can click on our garbage here. One thing at a time. It's interesting, with every version of Lightroom, I think that the spot removal tool is going to get better, and it never does. It's pretty handy, but it certainly is no substitute for Photoshop. Okay, we're doing better. I'm not going to bore you with messing around with this for too long, but see what we can get away with. That's fine. Before, after. Okay, now these power lines coming out of her head, I don't know if I'm going to be able to fix that, but we're going to give it the old college try. Zoom in here. Hello. And very carefully. You can just click and drag. A lot of people don't know that about the spot removal tool. You don't actually have to just click it once. You can do this all the way up. Okay, kind of weird down at the bottom here, so I don't know. Obviously, I would normally mess with this a little bit more, but for the sake of time, let's just give the people what they want and not worry about it too much. One last one right here. And there's some kind of spot over here. Okay, so we've cleaned up some of the distracting elements in this photo. We've adjusted that white balance, the exposure, we fixed that. We've kind of made some progress here, but now we're going to work on our actual subject. So first things first, I think I'm a little bit dark now, so we'll brighten things up a little bit. And we're just going to add some texture to the areas that we want to enhance and add a little bit of contrast to. So her hair, definitely. We want to add some sharpness, add some saturation. At the same time, I'll do her lips. There we go. Now we could reset this brush. We're going to do kind of the same thing. Just grab our shadow. You see, now this obviously is ridiculous, but you see how we can add definition to an area by enhancing the shadow? Let me just dial that back a little bit so it's more subtle. But if we just follow the natural shadow on her chin, just like that, we can add some shape to her face. Same with underneath the cheekbone, underneath the lips, under the nose, side of the nose. And all those things are just going to adjust the face the way that the shape of the face appears. So you can do that selectively. That's exactly the same process they do with contouring when a girl goes to get makeup done. Fun fact for you. Okay, I'm probably going to dial back that a little bit because I think I went a little extreme. Subtlety. Okay, now let's worry about her eyes. They're a little bit dark and I want to enhance them. Press O to see your mask if you're ever wondering. Down here we're going to go for eye brightener, see what happens. That's not too bad. Now we're going to touch up the skin here. Same kind of process. Zoom in. And of course you can use the spot removal tool for larger blemishes. But obviously the more of this you're doing, the longer it's going to take. So generally what I'll do is, sure, you can grab the stuff that is going to be a little harder to get with a basic brush. And once you've got the larger blemishes, then you just come in and go over it with a nice softening brush. So let's go back to our brushes. Find my skin soften brush. You can pause this video, create that same preset, and save it as a preset yourself. Or again, grab a preset pack from signatureedits.com. If this video has been helpful at all, do me a favor, can you hit that like button for me? Leave a comment below, tell me a hilarious joke. I don't much care what. I just want to hear from you, make sure I can do the best I can with what I got. I don't know much, but what I do know, I'm trying to share. If you have questions, please let me know. I'll get back to you as much as I'm able. Definitely when the video is first posted, I try and respond to every single comment. Okay, so we've softened her face a little bit, fix those pores a little. We can take our texture down still. I'm going to go really far, like too far a little bit, because then I'm going to go back over her face and selectively add some sharpness as well. Drop my brush's flow a little bit so I can just blend this in slightly. Okay, so you can see here's before and here's after. We've gone pretty extreme. Now I could dial it back, but I'm also going to bear in mind the fact that this is going to be way zoomed out, so I'm not going to feel it or notice it as much. And I'm going to add some sharpness back in here too. Something like that, because when I zoom out, I think that's going to be okay. A little too far. Good. Okay, so we've made some progress here before and after. Now let's go down to a few of our other tools here. We could grab our HSL and just take our greens and our yellows down a little bit. Honestly, the more selective you are about colors and just making things cohesively work with itself, the better your results are going to be. So generally, taking away colors can actually help your photo have a little bit more focus than beforehand when just everything was saturated. Okay, we're going to go down to our calibration now. I'm going to grab my reds, take them up a little bit towards orange, take the saturation down. I'm going to add the saturation now back into the green area like that. So here's before so far and after. And then I'm going to grab my blue primary channel and drag it this way. In general, that just tends to look good. So drag it like that a little bit, and you can either grab the saturation, take it down or up, just see what feels right for that particular photo. And again, if you want to know the technical way you're supposed to use this tool, I have a video on the channel, so go ahead, check that out. Today we're just using it stylistically. Okay, here's before, here's after. Lots of other cool stuff we could do, but time is of the essence. We'll just add a little dehaze, maybe darken it a little bit, and lastly, just place a radial filter here and brighten the area our model is in. So we'll take our contrast down a little bit, whites up just a tad. There's before that, after, just really subtly. Good. Before, after. Progress has been made. And again, do me a favor, tag your versions of these photos at Signature Edits Co. so I can see them and check them out. All right, this photo is really cute, really funny. The only thing is, well, there's a couple. If I were doing this photo again, I didn't take it to begin with, but if I were, try and make sure that the subject is really in focus, because we don't have a super sharp dog either in this mirror or in this window. Also having its face, although that's really hard to orchestrate, would have been really nice if you were looking this way. Would have been funny. Lastly, if possible, I'm sure this was a candid shot and just taken before there was time to do so, but clearing away distracting clutter from your image, really going to improve your compositions. So let's just do a quick edit here. Grab that guy. Let's add some sharpness onto our little puppy friend. Like so. And your eyes are naturally drawn to the brightest part of the image. So what I'm going to try and do is brighten up this reflection because I feel like it's the most interesting part of the image. Like that's where my eyes are naturally really drawn. Press the apostrophe key, by the way, to invert your mask. So I'm going to brighten that up. And then we're going to darken everything else down to try and just downplay some of this clutter so you don't see it quite so much. So we're going to drag our brush over this area. Take our shadows down, blacks down, exposure down a little bit. Place it in shadow. We could even take our texture and our clarity down. So here's before that, after. We're just mitigating the amount of distraction that's going on. Lastly, we could crop it. So we're going to drag our crop. Unlock that. And just crop up. There we go. So before, after. I think we've improved the composition a little bit. Let's move on. Okay, windmill shot, really cool. Taken with a drone. Now, I don't know if this drone had the ability, but generally, when you've got drone photos, one thing I found is that they tend to lose a lot of detail in the shadows, and they don't handle high contrast scenes well. So if you had been able to take a high bracket shot, a medium, and a low, so just high exposure, low exposure, and a medium, normal exposure, and then you could combine them in Photoshop or Lightroom later, that would have given you a lot more dynamic range to work with. But as it is, it's a beautiful shot. I'm not going to worry too much about editing this particular photo because I think you guys understand how to edit a sunset photo. And to be honest, I'm just not feeling it. So, so there. That's for you to edit. Post your photos and I will let you know what I think. Love this shot. Absolutely love it. It's really cool. Now the only thing is the background, these waves here, kind of weird and noisy and pixelated. If we look at our image info, we've got ISO 1250, so that's probably why. Go to our detail, and we'll start by just adjusting that noise. Somewhere around there. And we want maybe a little color noise reduction. There, that feels better. Before, after. I could take it even further because I actually don't want this to be super in focus. I want to really sharpen the waves on the front here, and the back I want to feel nice and dreamy. So, hello. Grab our brush here. So these waves in the distance, I'm going to smooth them out a little bit. I'm intentionally going to get rid of some of their sharpness because they just look too sharp to me. Take our contrast down a bit. Oh, make sure I put my flow up. Take the exposure of those waves down just a tad. Hello. Okay. Somewhere around there. Before, after. Next, I want to enhance the texture of these waves. So for me, I think finding a direction in the photography so that your eyes are really clearly led to a specific area of interest, and then getting rid of everything else that doesn't serve to kind of lead you towards that interest, that's the biggest ticket when it comes to creating a nice edit. So figure out what it is you want to focus on, try and minimize the distractions and maximize the focus on that particular subject. So let's reset. This is kind of the area that I think is the most interesting in the shot, the texture of these waves. So now we're just going to grab that texture and enhance it a little bit. Maybe bring the highlights up. Increase the exposure just a hair. Add a little bit of clarity. That's feeling better. I'm going to do the same thing because I kind of like the way this brush is feeling. So I'm duplicating it. I'm going to hold Alt to get to my eraser. And I'm going to erase everything I just did, but I still have the brush settings. Then I'm going to add that same brush onto our clouds here in the sky. Add a little dehaze. Somewhere around there. And of course, it all depends what you like. But for me, I think I'm happy with that. We could continue messing around with this. Obviously, we've got a little bit of almost a color cast vignette happening here where the center of the image is a lot warmer than the outside. So you could see if it feels better to actually darken this area of the image and warm it up a little bit. Reset, warm it up. And that could add kind of an interesting vibe to the photo as well. So we'll add a little bit of warmth. Bring our contrast down so we don't have quite so much contrast going on. And then also bring our exposure down a little bit. Again, that's going to help us just focus in on the area we really want to focus on, which is right there. We'll do the same thing on this corner. Before, after. Not a whole lot. I think it's a gorgeous photo, so I'm going to leave it there. Okay, this shot, really lovely use of background and foreground colors. Notice how the colors of the skateboard almost perfectly coincide with the background. Choosing the background, just getting it out of focus isn't always enough. You want to be aware of the colors that are happening there and the textures, because that's going to make a big difference on whether or not it supports the main part of your photo or not. So I'm starting by removing this sensor dust. That's one thing that could have been improved in this shot. Always be aware. Your camera collects dust. You want to keep that sensor clean, because if you get back from a big shoot, you've got 1,000 photos to edit and you have to do that to every single one, you will be upset. Let's just say I've got some experience in that particular dumb mistake. All right, I'm going to take my contrast down, exposure up, invert that mask using the apostrophe key, and that's just going to brighten up our skateboard. Was that necessary? I don't know, probably a little bit too much. And then let's take our texture and our clarity and our dehaze up. Oh, totally thought I was using a brush. Same thing, I just want to enhance the texture of the skateboard, maybe make the colors pop a little bit. So texture, clarity, dehaze. Don't go too far. Good. Now there's a million different things we could do with this shot. I want to see what you do. Tag @SignatureEditsCo. Okay, this shot we've got some really weird color bleeding going on. So if you look at her arm here, we've got this green color cast. My assumption, there's actually multiple lights going on in this room. There's probably an artificial light, a tungsten light bulb somewhere, and window light as well, and the two mix together and create this kind of weird, gross combination. So whenever you are doing a shoot indoors, or just any shoot, always be aware of wherever the light is coming from. You're going to get different reflections, colors, whatever. You're best limiting it to one type of light if you can. So if you are just using natural light, just use natural light. Shut off all the overhead lights when you get to the shoot. If you're just using overhead, make sure you actually shut those blinds and make the curtains close, because it's going to make a big difference. Just having that consistency makes things so much better. So we adjust our exposure, maybe cool things down a little bit, looks like. And then we're going to deal with this color cast. So one of the ways to do it, go to your hue, figure out what the color is that we're dealing with our spot tool. Yeah, it looks like yellow. And then we can just take that yellow towards red. In this particular case, that was pretty easy to fix, which is good. You'll notice it kind of fixed the color cast we had on her teeth as well, but they're still pretty saturated. So we're going to zoom in here. Now, if you ever have yellow teeth in a photo, the easiest way to fix those is not actually to mess with the saturation and take the saturation down, although sometimes that can work. The easiest way, take your highlights up a little bit and just shift your white balance towards blue. That's really all you have to do to fix teeth. Before, after, and zoom in to make sure you didn't, zoom out to make sure you didn't take that too far. So in this case, we could go a little bit further. Maybe take our highlights up a little bit, make sure I got all those teeth, good. And this one over here has a little bit more color, so we'll zoom in. Sometimes it's just the light, just the photo, not necessarily even their teeth that are the problem. And teeth don't have to be perfectly white. Like if you're actually looking at teeth zoomed in most of the time, like that went way too far. We're used to seeing teeth be a little bit yellow. Gonna erase. Quick trick for you, if you hold down the Alt key while you have your brush up, it'll toggle between your eraser and whatever brush you're on. So that can save you some time. Okay, photo looks good. Things that could have been improved, obviously the lighting would have been nice to have that a little bit, well, just not have to deal with that issue. Another thing is just tiny little details like this necklace, just slightly moving it in behind. But it's a great shot, I'm really liking it. So I'm just softening that area, and I'm going to darken it down because we don't really need to focus on it. And we could do all the other stuff that we did before on our portraits, just touching up the skin, using light to shape it if we wanted to. In this case, we're going to keep moving. Okay, this shot, really cool photo of an awesome spot, but if we zoom in, we can see there's some lens dust that needs taking care of, and nothing in this photo is really sharp. Like it's all kind of sharp. If we look at the actual photo settings, it was taken at ISO 118mm at f22. So f22 is probably the reason that this photo is not sharp. And you might be used to saying, oh, okay, well if the f-stop goes higher, it's going to be sharper. Well, that actually only applies to a certain extent. So let's say your lens has f1.8 as its widest aperture. That's the biggest it can open up, the most light it can let in. That's also going to be the softest point of that lens. Now, there's a whole bunch of math that just doesn't matter. However, the easy rule of thumb is to say, okay, if we double whatever that number is, the lowest one, that's kind of going to be the ideal range to use that lens in terms of sharpness. Because as we start to close that aperture, so we go from f1.8 to f3.5, that's when things start to get at their peak kind of sharpness. So f3.5 to f5.6 is where it's going to be the most sharp. Then we have the reverse happen as we go and stop down more and more and more. Things are actually going to get less sharp. So if it's a super bright day, you would have been far better off. We also were taking it 1/25th of a second, which is super weird. Would have been way better using a super high shutter speed, and then we could have used an f-stop of, say, 5.6, and we would have had a sharper image. Another thing that might be causing you issues if you're having stuff like this happen to you where things just aren't sharp the way that they should be, might be your lens. Now, if you're still using the kit lens that came with your camera, those are kind of known for not being as sharp as a more expensive lens. For example, when I got my Canon 5D Mark III, I went out and I bought a Tamron 2470 because everyone said, oh, it's just like the Canon except for it's $1,000 cheaper. So I bought it. And then every single photo I took, I kid you not, looked like this. Nothing was actually crisp and beautifully sharp. Everything was kind of smudgy. And that was just because it was a cheaper lens. So certain lenses are much sharper than others. And if you're having that issue, you might want to look into upgrading your lenses before you upgrade cameras. Because the camera body itself, honestly, if you have great lenses on an older body, you'll still get amazing photos. If you have crappy lenses on a newer camera body, doesn't matter how new the camera body is, the lens is actually what's going to affect what gets into that camera to begin with. So again, sensor dust, watch for stuff like this because imagine having to do this for several photos. And it can really ruin your shot if you happen to have a big dust mark come up on something important and not just on the sky. Also, as you stop down, so f22, you're going to have way more of these guys show up than had you had your aperture further open. Okay, there's a lot of different things we could do in this photo. Things that I would have liked to see it improved a little bit is just some direction. There's some leading lines happening here. It's kind of interesting, but I don't really know where to look, especially because everything is in focus. Having a subject here, somebody walking, I don't know, would have made it just, for me, a little bit more interesting. So other things we could do, of course, you can mess around in your HSL. We could, do something super old school. Take all the color out except for one color. Or you can just mess around, make it black and white. I don't know. Sky is your oyster. He said in a way that made no sense to anyone. So I'm just going to darken things down, maybe take the texture and the clarity down a little bit. And so this is kind of more interesting to me simply because we've got an area of focus. So right now in here is in focus, everything else is softer. And as you do that, you wind up just having a more interesting shot overall. So I'm going to take this one step further, reset our mask. I'm just going to enhance, let's say that this is the area we really want people to focus in on. Okay, great. Grab our texture, take that up. Sharpness, take that up. And we could even make it a little bit brighter. right? So now our eye really knows where to look, whereas before it was kind of looking everywhere. Now it has a really specific direction to head. Fix this tower because it's just too dark. A couple ways of doing that. Of course, I could literally just brighten it like this, or I could be a smarter guy. Go to my radial filter that I did before, if I can find it. Hello? There you are. Press O so I can see what I'm doing. Go to my brush and just erase the effect of that brush on this area. Like so. Press O again. You can see my brush was way too sloppy, so that's not going to work. Something like that. Take our float down. Okay, before, after. Show me what you come up with. All right, we got one last photo. This is the one with the color cast up against the back of her shirt. If you look at the front of her shirt, nice and white. Back of her shirt, super teal. It was taken on a very bright day, and I bet you money what happened is the sun's up here somewhere, and there's probably a blue building storefront in behind her. The sun's hitting that storefront, reflecting onto her shirt, and bam, we have blue shirt / this is the real frustrating, hard to deal with part. We have color cast all over her skin. So just be aware of that when you're shooting, especially on a bright day. Also watch your reflections. So how do we fix this? Well, easiest way is just to go into our HSL panel. We're going to find out what color we're dealing with here, just using the spot tool. So we've got some blue, maybe a little bit of aqua. Easiest thing, take the saturation of the blue down, take the luminance of the blue up. Just like that, we've kind of gotten rid of that color cast. Has it affected the rest of the photo? A little bit, but in this particular shot, I think we can get away with it, and it's not a big deal. Next thing I'm going to do, grab a radial filter. I'm just going to make her the brightest part of this image. So I'm going to take the exposure down on the outside. Before, after. So we've really just focused in on our subject. Next, I made the bottom of her a little bit dark with that mask, so we'll just add a little bit more exposure, drop that contrast, maybe a little bit of saturation. And now we've lost saturation from those blues, so we'll take saturation up in the rest of the shot. So I'm actually going to use the vibrance control instead of the saturation because it's going to leave the skin tones alone a little bit more. Or, let's just see which we like better. Probably saturation around there somewhere. Because we had so much blue on her skin up here, now it's desaturated, so we are going to want to address that. So easiest way here, just a simple brush like that. You can take your saturation up, maybe add a little warmth, and that's going to naturally add some kind of orange back into the skin. Do the same thing on her arm. Might need to do a different mask for that though, because it's slightly more extreme. So, two options here. We could just lower our exposure, turn that gray spot into just a shadow. We won't notice it as much. And then we can add a little bit of color using our white balance creatively, like that. Before, after. It also slims down her arm, so win-win for everybody. Lastly, let's go down to our calibration. We can just mess around with some stuff, see what we can come up with. There's certainly a right way and a wrong way to do this, but sometimes it's just okay to experiment. See what you come up with, and get a better handle of the tool you're using. So we could actually just do something really intense like this. Take our reds, figure out where we like the skin to sit. Somewhere around there. Here's before, here's after. That's looking a little dark and desaturated. Oops. So I'm going to raise my exposure. Maybe dial back my desaturation of said blues. Stuff like that. So, show me what you come up with. I hope this tutorial has been helpful in some way, shape, or form, that you've created something awesome and that you're happy with and you've learned something. So if you have, do me a favor, tag me at Signature Edits Co. on Instagram, and make sure to leave a comment below on this video and hit that like button because it really helps me just share my stuff. Cool? So if you want some free presets, head to signatureedits.com. And if you want to grab more free raw files, feel free. In the meantime, I will see you later. Go create something awesome. Peace.